Hey up hobbyists, and welcome to the first of what I hope to be a series of how to make terrain for tabletop role-playing games. Today I'm going to take you through how I made these simple but what I like to think are fairly effective grassland tiles. So to start with, we get our basic tools: 12-inch steel ruler, adjustable craft knife, pencils, and of course XPS foam. Now, how I started with this, we measure along both sides to see how long we want the tiles to be. To start with, for the basic one, I went for a simple 6x6 inch square. Then we draw the lines, cut along them, obviously being careful with the cutting, and our first tile is started. You may find this much easier with a carpenter's square, but I just wanted to get stuck in straight away with the basic tools that I had. The next part for me was purely personal preference, whether or not you want to have a grid on your tiles. I measured out a simple 1-inch grid, then deepened the lines with a pencil so they would still stand out once the tiles were covered in the final basing material. Now for texture, I was using a technique that I learned from RP Archive. Go check out their channel for some awesome builds. I balled up some tin foil, the good quality thick stuff of course, and rolled and pushed it into the surface to make it look broken and uneven. And there we go, one tile ready for painting. Now for painting the tiles, I went for a base of burnt umber. This was a craft paint that I picked up, as you can usually get more for your money with these ones rather than using miniature paints. This was mixed with Mod Podge to add some protection to the tiles and a bit of water to thin it down, make it last longer and flow better, obviously. The mix was a rough 1:1:1 for the 3 parts, 1 part paint to 1 part Mod Podge to 1 part water. This was then coated over the whole tile and left to dry. Right, once dried, the surface of the tile was solid, though it did end up warping some of the larger tiles somewhat, so it might be worth strengthening the back either with some chipboard or giving the back coat a thinned down Mod Podge to try and bring that shape back a little bit. I then did a fairly heavy dry brush over the whole tile with some leather brown. And when that was dry, I went back over it again with a rough dry brush, this time with a 1:1 mix of leather brown and bone white. The final result should look something like this. Now onto the fun part, the basing material. For these tiles I went with Geek Gaming's Base Ready Scribblands. Now, I know these are supposed to be mainly for miniature basing, but it worked really well with these modular tiles. To start, I made a mix of 1:1 PVA glue to water, brushed it on in sections so that it wouldn't dry before adding the basing material. Then just sprinkled on the basing material and then patted it down so that as much would stick as possible. After tapping off the excess, I did this over the rest of the tile. At this stage it still looks quite rough, but I wouldn't worry about that right now. For this first tile, I added some static grass in patches by dabbing on some more of the PVA glue in certain areas, then dropping on the static grass by rubbing it through my fingers and just tapping off the excess. After this first tile, I decided to just add a decent amount of the static grass into the basing mix and just doing it simple, quick and dirty. And I do think the second approach worked quite well, to be fair. Once this was done, I needed to seal the basing mixture to make sure it was up to the test of regular use of miniatures, you know, moving across the surface. I didn't capture footage of this as I had to do it on the floor, down there. I opted for Geek Gaming Matte Scenic Sealant, as I have seen it recommended so many times. Basically, I laid down some greaseproof paper on the floor in the hobby cave, laid out the tiles on top, and then completely just doused it in the sealant, spraying it all over the surface until you could just see it everywhere. Then left it for 24 hours to thoroughly dry, and this is how they came out. For such a quick and simple approach, I think they worked really well. In the end, I created a few different sized tiles and added some extra details to a few, such as a path, some trees, a little well that I had lying around, and some gravestones for some of them. And that's pretty much it. I hope you found this quick and easy tutorial somewhat useful. I feel there's a lot more that can be done from this simple starting point. Let me know if you want to see something different. I do have a few crafting ideas in my mind. One of them may be a castle. I've got a few Pringles tubs set aside for that. Just keep an eye out. You'll see what I'm going to use them for, don't you worry. Feel free to like, subscribe, and follow the old socials, all linked down below. And if you want to help support, we do have a Ko-Fi as well. Ko-Fi, coffee, whatever you want to call it. But that's it for today. Laters.